Hi, this is my review of the KULT Divinity Lost Tarot deck. This deck of cards is very different from your standard deck of tarot cards. These cards are used to determine many things in your KULT Divinity Lost stories and campaigns. You can determine everything: allies, antagonists, locations, plots. It is carried out through a series of readings, and they are very flexible, so you can create all sorts of things for your KULT sessions in many ways. Now, let's talk about the quality of the PDF. I also must mention that you can obtain this as a physical deck of cards. In fact, I hear that the quality of the deck of cards is quite excellent, so I recommend that you get the physical deck instead. But for those of you that want to print the deck, this PDF is truly high quality. You get two files. You get the file with all of the cards, and also the instructions on how to use the cards with the readings. So when it comes to instructions, they look quite similar to all of the other KULT books. The graphic design is the same, it's quite elegant and mysterious, slightly eerie. The reticule also communicates that sense of vertigo, but it's still quite easy on the eyes to read the entire thing. The font looks great, it's simple yet elegant, and it fits the occult theme. It looks like it's revealing the mysteries on how to use these cards. And when it comes to the art of the cards, it is magnificent. It is symbolic, evocative, and slightly nightmarish. So overall, the quality is excellent. Now let's talk about the content, that is the instructions and the meaning of the cards. So you have an introduction on how to use these cards to flesh out your campaign. Sometimes you are left with many questions about the ideas that you have been thinking about on how to create these stories, so you may need a bit of help filling in the gaps, adding more depth to every aspect of the story or the campaign. If you want to add more to the characters, to the different plot points, any element of the story, with these cards arranged in the proper readings, you can fill the gaps. You can build those bridges between different ideas and concepts so that it makes more sense when you link it all to the lore of KULT Divinity Lost. You can also use these cards as an improvised way to handle different situations. Maybe there is an event that you didn't plan, maybe there is a non-player character that suddenly became quite important to the story, or maybe there is any other thing concerning the plot, the way that things develop, that you're having a difficult time on how to make sense with the rest of the campaign. So with this deck, you can draw one card or do a quick reading, and you can handle anything that your players throw at you, so that there is a feedback between your ideas and your players' ideas, and it makes sense with the mysteries that you are tackling. So after receiving some tips on how to trust your instincts when reading the cards, how to come up with your own interpretations of the symbolism within each card, you have clear instructions on how to do the reading. This is a sort of mini ritual. You basically do this before preparing a story or a campaign, but like I said, later on, they are going to tell you how to use these cards to improvise, depending on whatever happens in the encounters, in the unfolding story. So you make this arrangement of cards, and each part of this arrangement is going to contain some information concerning individuals, creatures, artifacts, locations, cults, and plots. So you do a reading for each of these different aspects of a story or a campaign. So for example, let's say that you are generating non-player characters. You check out the appropriate reading template, so it would be the individual template, and the first card will tell you about the characteristics of the individual. Card 2 could tell you something about the past of that individual. Card 3 could tell you about the ambition that drives that individual, and it applies to all of the different aspects. Maybe you want to flesh out a location. Card 3 could tell you of some unexpected or quirky trait of that location. Card 5 could tell you something that makes the location exceptional. If you are creating something related to cults, Card 1 could tell you the power that drives the cult. Card 2 could tell you an important thing about the cult's history. If you are trying to make sense of the plot overall, the plot template could tell you more about the power that opposes the plot, or a power that supports the plot, and what is the next move in the story. Or maybe you want to create some creatures, some enemies perhaps. You could determine what the creature's weaknesses are, or the strength, or where you could find more information about the creature. You also have a template for artifacts. Maybe there is someone else looking for this artifact that the player characters are searching for. You have information on how to determine the origin of the artifact and what's the source of its power. They even give you an example reading to make sense of it all. So this arrangement and these templates are quite flexible for you to come up with your own templates. So you could handle it as a very intricate, perhaps extended process when you are determining every aspect of the campaign, be it a single individual, a single location, or a single cult, or you could create your own templates to determine everything at once. So this is quite fun. As a game master, you will never know what is going to happen in the next story that you are going to run. Then we have information on readings during play. You basically draw a single card to answer a question. You need to be quite specific. You could ask something like, who is the person that lives in the hotel room next door? Or maybe you're going to determine what item is going to be an important clue. Or maybe you are trying to figure out what's the player character's next contact. So everything about the adventure can be fleshed out during play, and it's going to be very easy for you to come up with an answer on the spot, even if the players try something that is quite unexpected and unusual. You just need to draw a single card, and because each card has a lot of richness when it comes to symbolism, you'll find the answer immediately. Even if you do not memorize the cards, this structured booklet will make it quite easy for you to determine the action, the next encounter, the next mystery right away. Now I'm going to talk about all of the cards. I won't go too much into the symbolism. I will just give you a brief overview of what each card means, and I'm going to give my thoughts on the design of the cards. So from left to right, we have the card that represents the awakened man. This is the path of awakening and the true divine origin of humanity. This card reveals connections to understanding the past of humanity, and I think that the design is great. You have this sort of unborn human with the potential to be a king of his own life or of life itself. And you also have this symbolism on the lower left, this sort of pentacle that you would see in perhaps books of occult lore or grimoires. So there is a lot to dig into this image, but to me it represents potential. It has a lot to do with the awakening of a player character within the game of KULT Divinity Lost and matching or perhaps even surpassing the powers that be. You have the city in the background that at the same time represents a very imposing sort of three peaks that are quite intimidating, but they hide a light behind them. The next card that represents the Demiurge, the ruler who is now lost and was the creator of mankind's prison. This card reveals the connection to this lost Demiurge and the power of the metropolis, and how humanity is stuck in this cycle of death and rebirth. Well, you see a triangle with an eye, very appropriate for something that represents the enslavement of humanity, and you have these different glyphs that also feel a lot like they came out of a grimoire. You see this light behind the pyramid and this alien eye overseeing it all. It almost makes you feel a bit afraid if the Demiurge is actually still existing in some way, just lost for the moment. Still, it is a very terrifying card because it symbolizes how the Demiurge managed to triumph over mankind, and mankind is in its current state of dormancy because of the Demiurge. The next card represents Astaroth. He is the ruler of Inferno and the shadow of the Demiurge, the being who strives to become the new Demiurge by binding Elysium to Inferno rather than the powers of Metropolis. So this is a card related to a higher power that at the same time it's a lower power. That is, this is a card of a tyrant that tries to manipulate humanity against Metropolis. I think the image of the Death Angel at the center of the card is quite appropriate. You see one hand dealing out destruction in the form of fire, and perhaps even illumination in a way, although it is an illumination that is just a glimpse of what humanity could actually reach The other hand has this sort of pentagram pointing downwards, representing the darker powers of the death angels, the infernal powers, that which goes lower in a downward spiral. You even have Ouroboros on the background, the snake biting its own tail. It makes a good composition with the horns and the black silhouette, with those glyphs and a human shackled at the bottom. So it's all about controlling mankind, destroying it if that is needed for this tyrant death angel to make its ascension. The next card represents an archon, the principle of hierarchy. This is an influence that manifests as structures with masters and servants. This is all about aristocracy and those that are kept low, for some few privileged ones to reign as tyrants overall. So in contrast with the other card, this is not the card of a single ruler. Rather, this is a card of individuals within the illusion, within what humans think is real life. And so in the image you see these two individuals kneeling besides a robed figure in a throne with some demonic skulls placed on the sides, and keeping a religious artifact within its fingers. You also have this occult glyph at the lower center, and the red sun at the back with a darkness surrounding it all. It's almost as if these kneeling figures that are lower on the hierarchy do not know that they could actually rise above the throne if they only manage to look past the darkness. The next card represents the principle of submission. This is a manifestation of religious leaders, martyrdom, fanatics, theocracy, dogma, and doctrine. This is everything about religion, about making a few individuals exalted in the eyes of the masses, while they are naked and fragile. That is, the followers of religions are quite vulnerable to the whims of the rulers of those religions. This card is about those that have created religion to misguide humanity towards a fake spirituality so that they never awaken to their true divinity. The next card represents the principle of community. This is about the family's power over the individual and the mistrust of the state and other authorities outside of the family, about the strength of traditions over individuals and the distrust between strangers. So this is a card of how humans, when they are very little, when they are babies as exemplified with the card, they are immediately indoctrinated in a series of protocols. In a way, you could say that this card relates a bit with the principle of submission, but this is all about a limited circle, raising a human to work within a certain rail, a certain path, very narrow when compared to the actual grander scope of things. You can see the constellation on the back, and still all of that darkness and that checkered pattern on the floor, also related to mind control, as many of you know, that exemplifies how an individual is programmed by his or her family, and many of them remain so without questioning what is actually the truth and what is false. The next card represents the principle of safety. This is people's longing for safety, the desire to feel comfortable and safe from dangers. They want that sense that they are protected against everything that is unknown and dangerous. As you can see from the design, you see a human that is still a prisoner of the illusion, shackled to this dense reality of sorts, and receiving a limited amount of water from a higher source. So this makes a lot of sense, that there is this human that feels completely exposed to the dangers of the world and beyond, and every now and then an illuminated figure grants a bit of water to calm that human's thirst. But is that actually necessary? Wouldn't it be better to break these chains that bind us to this false reality and drink from the entire jug, from the entire reserve, instead of just settling for a small quantity of divine wisdom? The next card represents the principle of law. This is about bureaucratic institutions. This is about laws and the control of society itself. So you have this figure crowned by a pyramid with an eye. Again, very appropriate for those that want to enslave humanity. And you see this sort of judge, justice, exemplar type of figure holding a sword and some scales, representing that if you stray from the path marked by the law, you will be punished by the sword. So this is about fear and control. This is about people being terrified, being in a sort of panic, exploding in chaos, losing control. And yet they do not realize that they could take control of things, that they do not need someone else to tell them how to live their lives within certain parameters of law that benefit a few. Then we have the card that represents the principle of allure. This is a very superficial card, that is, the meaning is related to cravings of beauty, worshipping celebrities, prophets, wasting time, fixated on the lives of others, rather than looking within ourselves. So you can see this Black Widow, a sort of cult figure that draws people in. This is different, for example, when compared to the card related to religion, in the case that this Black Widow is not obviously a figure to be worshipped, and yet this figure is still worshipped. This is related to the cult of personality, where many people are using others as examples rather than being their own examples, of being their own people, actually thinking with their own minds, playing with their own thoughts, rather than constantly listening to what someone tells you to do, to what someone has been doing with his or her personal life. You will get caught in this web. Then we have a card that represents the principle of victory. This is an influence that unites societies against a common enemy. It's an us versus them mentality. It's about divide and conquer. This is about a military illusion, making some people think that they are fighting for the greater good, and they are actually creating conflict, destroying themselves eventually. I really like the composition of this card, with some planes, a knight, and a defeated foe at the bottom. So it represents conflicts through time and space and beyond. Wars have always been there, to the benefit of those that cause them, and to the demise of those that fight them. This is about keeping people ignorant of who they should be fighting. The knight is riding a unicorn, a creature of fantasy, defeating an enemy, while ignorant to those planes that symbolize the future of never-ending wars. If only they could actually pinpoint the true enemy within perhaps their own nations. Then we have the next card, which represents the principle of honor. This is about prestige, the desire to be elevated, expecting admiration from your peers and receiving some mercy from those above you based on your behavior and a certain parameter of honor. So here you can see with the card, many people sacrifice to this altar of honor. You see this sort of executioner figure with a dog at its side. Both the dog and the icon above the executioner's head have a sort of deity symbolism to them. You see this man kneeling, ready to be killed if he is not honorable. So the executioner could determine if that man lives or dies, but you have this sort of two deity-like figures actually manipulating the executioner into killing this man. Sometimes people are so fixated on what is expected of them based on principles of honor, on hierarchy, on prestige, and they do not accept themselves, and so they bow down, ready to have their heads cut off if they are considered dishonorable, according to a certain sense of honor of those that imprison mankind. The next card represents the principle of avarice. This is about greed, about consumer frenzy, corporate power, corporatism at its whole. Many remain poor, some manage to get by, and a very few stand above all others with all of their resources at hand. So this is obviously the power of different institutions. You see a sort of tree-like object on the background with a dark sun shining above, and you see this wicked-looking man counting money just above the desk that seems a lot like a sort of pagan altar. And you see these two figures at the bottom representing people trying to obtain just a bit of that money, just a little of that wealth, when a single greedy man has it all for himself, no matter the cost for the rest of the world. The next card represents the principle of awakening, previously conformity. This is about people finally breaking free from the illusion, having other dimensions revealed to them. And these people also inspire others. This is about magicians and scientists and philosophers. So with this figure that looks a bit androgynous, it looks more female, but at the same time there is a certain masculine quality to it. It's a figure that represents both man and woman. And you see the staff as a symbol of authority and of someone who is seeking knowledge. The ankh and the symbol of infinity could also be linked to overcoming a sort of poison of the spirit, as symbolized by the Black Widow in a former card. So here the human has finally managed to get close, a bit closer, to the principle of infinity, of limitless wonder. And it looks like the figure is actually commanding a thunderbolt to break the reality that has been presented before him or her. And with these two trees at the side, that obviously represent the trees that you could find on the Garden of Eden, concerning the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. This is a human finally starting a path towards becoming a higher power, a god. The next card represents the principle of power. This is about hunger for power, corruption, dictatorship. It has to do with oppression, insurrection, ruthlessness, and a totalitarian rulership. With the card, you have the same figure that has been seen previously in a throne. But here, you see that the kneeling figures are already quite monstrous. They have deformed their own spirits by kneeling down. And the crowned king, sitting at that satanic throne, with the mechanisms of control behind him, he is quite pleased with the system. The gears in the background are crushing all the different beings that are practically marching in line towards their own destruction. So this obviously represents the tyrants of the world governing others for their own sick desire, for their own sick fulfillment. This is about government, governing mentality, governing minds. The next card represents a principle of abuse. This is about taking children and assaulting their integrity. This is a perversion of adult love. This is about lost children that are ruined through the school system. This figure at the center almost looks like one of those Egyptian priests. The ankh on his head is pointing downwards. So this baby that he is holding on his left hand is being indoctrinated into his own death, into his own demise. You see the torch pointing downwards. This is about teachers educating children so that they are set on their own path to self-destruction. Perhaps this baby that appears in this card is one of the many individuals that will march towards the grinding gears represented on the principle of power card. Everything in this card is about knowledge that drives you downwards, that gets you down, that throws you into the grasp of the death angels. Then we have the principle of exclusion. This is about self-loathing, loneliness, hopelessness, anxiety, self-destruction, suicide, school shootings, and massacres. The symbolism in the card is quite blunt, quite obvious. You have this figure eating a baby. Maybe it's also an expression of pedophilia. Maybe it's just cannibalism. Maybe it's both. With the darkness on the background, with the mountains, the tree, the moon. This is all about a path to self-destruction, of just unplanned actions that result in harm to yourself or others. The symbolism is quite clear about this. Then we have the card representing the principle of fear. This is about influence, creating distrust between people, division. This is about finding someone to blame for every problem. This is about creating false narratives by the news media, rumors, manipulated visual evidence. So you have this skeletal figure on the card, hovering quite mockingly over so many people that are trying to get their hands on the truth. But this figure holds a cup and grapes high enough away from the grasp of the people, keeping away truth and many benefits and privileges, keeping people ignorant, blaming shadows, creating fictional enemies for themselves, and perhaps even putting blame on the next person to them, on even perhaps friends or family members. This is about creating distrust. I also like the third eye and the flame on the head of the skeleton, as a symbol that this figure knows about the truth, about reality, and keeps that locked away behind a curtain of falsehoods and disinformation. Then we have the principle of torment. This is about sadism, giving people pleasure from inflicting pain on others, or by being subjected to torment. This is about torture in all forms. It's quite obvious that it refers to physical torture based on the image of the card, but it could also be a sort of expression of emotional or psychological torture. This card is also quite blunt when compared with the card of the principle of exclusion, and could perhaps be a reference of how so many people are sacrificed to different altars each day. Maybe some are sacrificed to the altar of false science. Maybe some others are sacrificed in the altar of education. Maybe some others are sacrificed in an altar of religion or in an altar of government. It could apply in many ways. I also like how the curtains look at each of the sides of the card, expressing that there is a show going to be displayed, this torturous show, but it could also mean that there is some truth behind the curtain, some secrets that are kept behind a barrier, and using a gory spectacle as a sort of distraction so that people do not look behind the curtain and find out what is really going on. So within that context, I think this card is also quite representative of perhaps using murderous individuals as a distraction. Maybe they are constantly being released from jail, or maybe they are never incarcerated at all, and so they can keep people in fear, distracted from other matters. This card is very creepy. This is the principle of compulsion. This is a sort of maniac creativity that distorts reality. This is about portals to Inferno and beyond. This is about souls binding themselves into rotting corpses and haunting the living as distorted specters. The image on this card reminds me of something that Clive Barker once said, something along the lines of us being graveyards of ourselves. Different parts of us are constantly dying. And personally, I think that means different parts of us are also being reborn. But in this case, this is all about a sort of hidden insanity, a sort of knowledge or currents of thoughts that could be labeled as the thoughts of a madman, but with the robed figure holding a torch of yellow flame and black flame. It makes you think that there are two lights to the same matter, to the same subject. There is an aspect of brilliance and an aspect of madness to each truth. So it all depends on us, on extracting that brilliance, that genius, from so many ideas, from so many thoughts, and trying to put aside or perhaps eliminate altogether the madness within them, unless we want to wield that madness in some way. But that madness could be the end of us if we are not careful. The next card is the principle of conflict. This is about uncontrollable rage, bloodlust, senseless violence. This is about gangs, shootouts, corruption within the police and the military. This is about escalation of conflicts and how normal people teeter on the brink of explosive outbursts at all times. This image is also quite explicit. You see so many corpses, an explosion in the background that is quite familiar to us all, that hides a sort of entity of death within. This is about complete and utter devastation and desolation when your violent impulses are not channeled appropriately. There is a reason why we have violence within us. It's for self-preservation and to perhaps to put it to work for a just cause. But so many get tricked into wielding that violence with no purpose, no objective, without thinking straight. And that potentially leads to the complete obliteration of many undeserving of such rage, and perhaps even ourselves if we are not careful. The next card, featuring the principle of vengeance, is about paranoia, vindictiveness, obsession. This is about brutal revenge for non-existent affronts. This is about jealousy, and acts that seem to be retributive acts, but are just almost whims of our most violent impulses. When compared to the principle of conflict, which is about raw violence, the principle of vengeance uses justice as an excuse. Perhaps someone suffered some sort of grievance, some sort of harm. Perhaps someone had some loved one taken from him or her. Perhaps there was some sort of humiliation. It could be anything. Something was taken from you. So this principle gets you obsessed in getting revenge, to the point that you act carelessly, to the point that you end up losing even more than what you originally lost. Following that, we have the principle of lust. This is about hypersexualization and objectification in an obsessive way. This is about all sorts of violence in a sexual way. This is about pornography as a vice. This is about mindless desires and macabre orgies. At the center of the card, we see these two figures just bound together completely, in an almost convulsive way. You see how they are bound at their legs, hanging upside down from two different columns, representing perhaps a combination of light and darkness. The entire thing looks quite grotesque. There is no real attractiveness to it. These figures are just intertwined and bound in an almost corpse-like way. It almost seems like the corpses reached some sort of rigor mortis while being put in such a position, and that is the only reason why they are being held together in that grotesque form. Then we have the principle of discord. This is about deforming the natural world. This is about oil spills, forest fires, poison streams, misshapen animal life due to toxic mutations. This is about torrential rains and earthquakes and tsunami. Nature by itself is quite powerful and destructive, but when dark intentions play into nature and modify it, that danger becomes many times more grave, more disturbing. The fishman type figure at the center of a desert with a dark sun in the skies talks about something not being right at all. A creature that should not exist, perhaps having to adapt to toxic new places, while spreading a poisonous and disease presence all around. There is no telling what sort of disaster could arise when a dark science tampers with that should have been left alone, to follow its natural course. Now all of these cards compose the major arcana, and then we have the minor arcana that represents aspects of the illusion and our prison. They are quite simple in their design, not as elaborate as the major arcana, but they are still quite to the point and clear when it comes to the numerological aspects of what they represent. So these cards overall look a lot like your standard deck of playing cards. So I'm just going to go through all of the different symbolisms. So you have a card representing Metropolis, which is mankind's ancestral home, the eternal city and the very core of the demiurge machinery. You also have the Forgetfulness card, representing that which was faded from memory. You also have Remnants, that which was left behind after death, destruction, or transition. We also have a card that represents Spirit, the Psyche, the immaterial essence. We have Transition, crossing from life to death, or into another form of existence. You also have the card of Flesh, as a shell after death, or as a prison of a soul that should have been released. There's the Weapon card, representing the tool that brings death, transition through violence. We have Suffering, representing pain that comes with death and the cleansing of the soul. We also have Inferno, the shadow of Metropolis, containing many hells and citadels. All of these cards are tied to the skulls. They have to do with death as breakthrough and destruction that binds us to our flesh. This is connected to Metropolis and the Archons, Inferno and the Death Angels. The next suit is the suit of Roses, a symbol of passion and binding desire. A very carnal symbol, also related to sexuality, of course. This is about the primal forces of Gaia. So you have a card representing Gaia, the untamed wilderness, which cannot be controlled at all. You also have Birth, representing what comes out of passion, the start of something new, perhaps a new prison. You also have Survival, representing the will to go on against all odds. Survival of the fittest. It's a card of will. You also have Growth, representing the attainment of things, power, augmenting our body, exploring our own nature. You also have the card of the Predator, representing the hunter, the one that is hungry and preys on those that are weak. You also have the card of the Swarm, representing a gathering, a collective mind, a mob swallowed by passion, and all sorts of unruled feelings. You also have Prey. This is about the victim of passion, or a target for some enemy. You also have a card of Obsession, representing the grip of passion. You also have the card of Love. This is a bond that could be stronger than death. It can give you strength and purpose, but it could also drag you down if you are not careful. Next we have the suit of Hourglasses, tied to time and space. This is an imprisonment binding us to the illusion. Time and space are matters of perspective, of taking a look at reality. This creates a labyrinth. It also has a strong connection to Aklis and the underworld. So we have the card of Aklis, representing nothingness, infinity, the void, the obliteration of the soul. You also have the card of Future, revolving around things yet to come, potential. You also have a card of the Past, things that have already occurred and come back to haunt you. You also have Space, representing someone or something that travels forward through space in any direction. It never stops moving. You also have the card of the Borderland, the place between two worlds, two states of being, where time and space meet the physical world. Then we have a card representing Hidden. This is about something that is obscured, tied to the city of Thonor and the underworld. You also have the Labyrinth, an underworld maze of confusion. You also have the Crossroads, a connection between two distinct paths, a choice that has to be made. You also have the card of the Gate, representing a threshold or an obstacle that must be crossed, or perhaps you need to guard that gate. Next we have a suit of Crescents, also known as the Moon. This is a symbol of dreams, searching for the unattainable, the source of creation. It has a strong connection to Limbo. You have a card of Vortex, which is about the very source of creation and transforming chaos. You also have Creation. This card is about raw godly power to shape the world, to turn dreams into reality, something inspiring. You also have a card of Undoing. This is part of the natural cycle, an obliteration of structures that are no longer needed. These structures could be physical or immaterial. You also have a card of Transformation, a state of extreme change and metamorphosis. You also have the Connection, of intertwined structures, wheels, anything that could help you or hinder you on your way. You also have a card of Merging, expressing a combination of ideas, bodies, and minds. You also have a card of Reflection, a mirror that could show the truth, or perhaps even a lie. You have the card of Repetition, Deja Vu, an endless loop, a recurring theme in existence. You also have the card of Stillness, representing apathy, a situation that seems to be unchanging. Then we have the Ice suit, representing Elysium, the enslavement of our minds and souls. This is also a faith that binds us, a crippling madness, and a sort of penetrating insight that allows us to pierce the veil, to see through the illusion. We have the card of Elysium, the very core of the illusion that keeps us in chains. We also have Imprisonment. This is the capturing of the body, the soul, and the mind. You also have Faith, that gives you purpose, but could make you blind. You also have Distractions, everything that casts away your thoughts from the real things that matter. You also have a card of Division, that keeps us occupied with endless struggles. You also have a card of Rebellion, a struggle against the ruling order that could be fruitful or could be in vain. You also have the card of Madness, that overwhelms but it hides some sort of genius within it. You also have the card of Visions, that could bring new revelations and insight, but it could also lead you to darker paths. You also have the card of Enlightenment, that could lead you towards enlightenment and awakening. This is a sort of purpose when it comes to those that seek the answer and the truth. And each one of the cards of the Minor Arcana contains everything related to individuals, locations, organizations, situations, creatures, and items that you can use when generating a new scenario for Cult or improvising during play. You can just draw one card and this will give you any tool needed to handle any unexpected action by the player characters. So for example, in the card of Madness, if you drew it to determine something about an individual, maybe you decide to include a deluded jazz musician as a non-player character. Or perhaps you want to create a boy without a mouth that suddenly appears before the player characters. Maybe you drew this card to create a sort of location. It could be an insane asylum, an apartment with torn down wallpapers, or maybe you decided to draw the card of Visions to determine an organization. It could be a group of pilgrims, or maybe dream interpreters. Maybe you drew this card of Visions to give you more insight about a situation. It could be related to nightmarish visions, to prophecy, to eyes gouged out. Or maybe you drew the card of Enlightenment to give you more information about a creature or flesh it out better. So maybe the player characters have encountered a child of the night, or even an awakened human. Or maybe you want this enlightenment to serve as a source of inspiration for an item or an artifact. Maybe the characters find an old floppy disk with all sorts of mysteries within it. Maybe they actually find a diary with mad scribbles. Maybe they just find a flashlight, or a ladder, or a map. So each of these cards is perfect to flesh out or complete or build from the ground up anything related to a scenario or a campaign. You could draw it randomly. You could just have all of the cards face up and just choose the one that you find most appealing for the situation at hand. So what do I think of this tarot deck for KULT Divinity Lost? This is an option, but a very excellent option. This is an optional product, a good alternative to generate your adventures, your campaigns, and to help you when the player characters have done some things completely off rails, I mean to the most extreme way. There's going to be one or more cards here that will rescue you from having the rug pulled from under your feet. Anything related to individuals, locations, organizations, situations, anything can quickly be determined by any of these cards. You could use the Major Arcana exclusively for a more general or outreaching outlook on the entire scenario or campaign, or you could use all of that powerful symbolism in a single aspect. And when it comes to the Minor Arcana, I think that these work much better for specific segments, specific parts of your scenario or campaign. And these cards and their meaning are so flexible. You could use the reading as presented in these diagrams contained in the instruction booklet, but you could also come up with your own readings, or just as I was saying, have all of the cards face up and just choose the one that you think fits the situation more appropriately. This is the perfect tool for both shaping your scenarios and campaigns, but also for those intense improvisation moments. You could use any of these elements as a sort of inspiration. You do not need to use the literal results contained in each of the cards. You could come up with your own and just pick and choose any sort of element, any sort of creature, artifact, or item, and give it your own twist, modify it, perhaps combine different concepts, come up with something completely new or more original when compared to the grander scale of the adventure scenario or the entire campaign. So this is a deck that you will use for the entirety of your career as a KULT game master. And it's also going to be useful with many other modern horror role-playing games. And perhaps even horror role-playing games in general. You just need to adapt a few things to the context. Maybe you're playing a game of a completely different theme. Maybe you're playing something that's medieval fantasy. You just need to change a few things to adapt it to that setting, to that world. Or maybe it's something related to sci-fi. I think that would be even easier, considering modern times are not that far away from some sci-fi settings. You just need to up the level of technology. I also think that this deck of cards is going to work great as a prop for your KULT scenarios, especially for the Taroticum mega scenario. That scenario is one of the best KULT scenarios out there. It's going to give you a lot when it comes to entertainment based on sessions. It's going to last you several months. If you haven't seen my review of Taroticum and other tales, check out the playlist that I'm going to put in the description of this video. And for those of you that are thinking of using this tarot deck as a sort of meditation tool to gain some insights, to create some sort of predictive models based on present information and past data, I think you could also use it like that. although the readings are going to be quite disturbing and dark. So it's a sort of tool to meditate on the darker aspects of life, perhaps. So overall, a very useful tool. I wouldn't consider it a must-have, but a very good option for Cult and for any horror RPG in general, when it comes to creating everything from the ground up or just improvising every now and then. Well, thank you so much for watching this review, and thank you to those that have been sending Drive Through RPG gift certificates to support the channel. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, all the information how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you for watching this review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.